Today we are going to be learning about mitochondria, the organelle that was once a cell. By the end of today's lesson, you will be able to describe the processes that produce energy in mitochondria, name the necessary components of energy production, and name the products of cellular respiration. Now, what are mitochondria? Let's take a look.
Or what is, totally objectively speaking, of course, the coolest part of the animal cell, its power plants, the mitochondria, these smooth, oblong organelles where the amazing and super important process of respiration takes place. This is where energy is derived from carbohydrates, fats, and other fuels and is converted into adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is like the main currency that drives life in Eukaryopolis. You can learn more about ATP and respiration in an episode that we did on that. Now, of course, some cells, like muscle cells or neuron cells, need a lot more power than the average cell in the body, and so those cells have a lot more mitochondria per cell. But maybe the coolest thing about mitochondria is that long ago, animal cells didn't have them, but they existed as their own sort of bacterial cell, and one day, one of these things ended up inside of an animal cell, probably because the animal cell was trying to eat it. But instead of eating it, it realized that this thing was really super smart and good at turning food into energy, and it just kept it. It stayed around. And to this day, they sort of act like their own separate organisms, like they do their own thing within the cell, they replicate themselves, they even contain a small amount of DNA. Now, what may be even more awesome, if that's possible, is that mitochondria are in the egg cell when an egg gets fertilized. And those mitochondria have DNA. But because mitochondria replicate themselves in a separate fashion, it doesn't get mixed with the DNA of the father. It's just the mother's mitochondrial DNA. That means that your and my mitochondrial DNA is exactly the same as the mitochondrial DNA of our mothers. And because this special DNA is isolated in this way, scientists can actually track back and back and back and back to a single mitochondrial Eve who lived about 200,000 years ago in Africa. All of that complication and mystery and beauty in one of the cells of your body. It's complicated, yes, but worth understanding.
When we know about mitochondria, we need to know why they're so important. And to understand that, we need to learn about cellular respiration, the process that creates the energy that fuels everything we do. The graphic in this slide shows a simplified version of cellular respiration, including the 3 steps: glycolysis, the citric acid cycle, and the electron transport chain. Looks a little complicated, right? So let's break it down. First, we need to know the goal of this entire process, and the goal is creating adenosine triphosphate, or ATP, which is a molecule that contains an amino acid, a sugar, and 3 phosphate groups. The first step in cellular respiration is called glycolysis, where we break down glucose, C6H12O6. The process takes place in the cytosol, or cellular matrix, which is outside of the mitochondria. Glycolysis produces 2 molecules of ATP, 2 molecules of pyruvate, which is made by splitting the 6-carbon sugar molecules in half, and 2 NADH molecules. The graphic on the right is more detailed than you will need to know, but it gives you a better visual. Next is the Krebs cycle, or citric acid cycle. I will be referring to it as the citric acid cycle, or CAC, later in the presentation. The cycle repeats twice for each molecule of glucose because there are 2 pyruvate molecules made per glucose molecule. The products of the citric acid cycle are 4 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of NADH, 2 molecules of FADH2, and 2 molecules of ATP, or GTP, which is an equivalent to ATP. Again, the graphic on the right is more detailed than I would like you to know, but it does give you a better visual. And last but not least, we come to the electron transport chain, which takes place in the inner membrane of the mitochondria and is made up of 4 protein complexes that help to create a proton gradient. You remember the NADH and FADH2 that we made in the citric acid cycle? Well, they are electron transporters, and they release electrons into each of the protein complexes they come across. The proteins move hydrogen ions across the inner membrane of the mitochondria, causing a proton gradient, meaning that there is more hydrogen on the outside of the membrane than there is inside. O2 is split and then is added to the hydrogen ions, creating water. The proton gradient powers the creation of ATP by flooding back through an enzyme called ATP synthase. Finally, we get to the end of the electron transport chain, and we have now produced 6 molecules of carbon dioxide, 6 molecules of water, and 38 molecules of ATP. Keep in mind this 38 molecules is the best case scenario. In most cases, we probably only get 29 to 30 molecules of ATP. This is still an area of active research. Now that we know what cellular respiration is, let's see an example of what it can do in yeast. Now, what is yeast, you may ask? Well, it is the single-celled organism used in the making of bread, cheese, yogurt, and alcohol. Let's see it in action.
My name's Paul Rhodes. I'm the owner and founder of Paul Rhodes London Bakery. We're artisan bakers. Everything we produce is handmade and sourced from fine ingredients. Most of our flour does come from France. We take it in one hit every couple of weeks, 30 tonne at a time. We produce from 2 tonne of flour a night, which is, I think, in the region of 5,000 loaves. We make everything from your classic tin bread to birthday cakes, morning goods, many hundreds of dinner rolls, and also we make a couple of thousand of pastries and different muffins and cakes, brownies, scones. So yeah, busy. As you can see, we're all dressed in clean white jackets, and you have to scrub down a hairnet. So hygiene is a major concern of ours. Bread's one of the easiest things to make. 4 ingredients: you have your flour, your water, yeast, and salt, and that's the basic raw ingredients. We sell our product as a daily fresh product, so we don't use any preservatives or improvers. The only stabilizer that we use is extra virgin olive oil. The yeast that we use is fresh yeast. It's man-made. It's to a higher specification for industrial purposes, you know, producing bread on a larger scale as opposed the yeast that you might find in a supermarket. Yeast is a living microorganism. Within reason, any temperature, you're going to get a form of loaf, but yeast thrives on the perfect temperature, which is around 24 degrees, 26 degrees. It reacts with the flour, and it just develops and grows and puts that lovely bubbles and texture, and that's what gives a really nice, flavoursome, crusty loaf. It's like any fermentation, you know, like beer, wine. It's a similar process. From the machine, you get your nice dough. It's then left to rest. The yeast develops. It kind of doubles in size. Then we, what you call, knock the dough back, so you're removing the air. It's then cut and shaped into the finished product, be it a tin, a bloomer, a roll, a baguette. It's allowed to prove again, and then on the second proof, when it's reached a certain stage or a certain size, it's then baked, and that's when it goes into the oven. It's crucial that the ovens, or the temperature is hot. We bake at a very high temperature, 430, 440 degrees Fahrenheit. It's also essential that the temperature is maintained as well through the cooking. So when the bread hits that instant temperature, it's what we call, it gets the lift. It kind of inflates, and you get the final shape. And if it maintains the temperature so it doesn't drop, and you get this wonderful colour. Bread is one of the most wonderful, stable foods in the world. It's so much fun to make. The first time I made it, it was just such an amazing achievement, from, you know, a bag of white dust to this wonderful creation. You know, it is an art. Have fun, get out there and have a go. Get it into the oven, and you'll be amazed with the final product.
Alright, who really wants bread now? Also, I really want those ovens in my kitchen. They're just amazing. Now, based on what we've learned today, why do you think we need to eat? Think about that question until we meet in our next class.